So again, my name is Mark Henderson. I'm Director of Application Services with Zentegra. We are a Citrix Platinum partner out of Charlotte, North Carolina. You can see my information there on the bottom left of the slide if you'd like to get in touch with me following this webinar. Let me get my display back up here. All right, great. So during this webinar this morning, here's our agenda. We're going to be going through a little bit of who we are and what we do from the Zentegra side. I'll be going through why AppDNA, why would you want it in your environment. And then we'll play a little bit of let's say hypotheticals. I've been doing this or been around the product with AppDNA for several years. I've got a lot of real world experience, if you want to call it that, regarding it. So I've got some examples there of the value of AppDNA. I'm going to show you the AppDNA way of how it does application compatibility. We're going to talk a little bit about Compliance Manager. That's something new that they've added in AppDNA 7.9. We'll talk a little bit about AppDisks, which is the Citrix application layering technology that you can integrate in with AppDNA if you're a Citrix Platinum partner or customer. Then we'll go, of course, into a demo of the product, and then at the end, I'll do some Q&A. Now, I'm the only one as the organizer on this call, and we've got a couple of hundred people here. So it's gonna, if I don't get to all of the questions that you ask, then I will definitely follow up afterwards. But please feel free as we're going through this. If you have any questions regarding the product or any of its capabilities, please just post them in GoToWebinar, and I'll get to them. So first, who we are and what we do over on the Zentegra side. So as I mentioned, we are a Citrix Platinum partner. We're located out of Charlotte, North Carolina. The company is made up mostly of former Citrites or Citrix employees, including myself. We are based in the southeast of the United States, but we work everywhere. We've done projects in Alaska, the Cayman Islands, New York City, and we continue to grow exponentially. We're very busy up and down the eastern seaboard of the United States and to the southeast, and then now into the central part of the country as well. I run the Zentegra Application Services division of Zentegra. It's the application-centric division within Zentegra. On the Citrix side, the core product is AppDNA, which I show people the value around application portfolio management with the product, as well as how to use it for migrations, not only Microsoft operating system migrations when you're going from Windows 7 to Windows 10, but also on the server side, going from let's say 03 to 08 R2 or to 2012 R2, and then eventually to Server 2016 once Microsoft releases that as well. But you can also use it for migrations on the Citrix side, of course. Let's say you're going from XenApp Zen Desktop 6.5 up to 7.7, 7.8, 7.9. You can certainly use AppDNA to help you migrate to those environments without having that environment actually stood up within your infrastructure. We also do application layering, as I mentioned earlier in the agenda, with AppDisk on the Citrix side, as well as Unidesk. It's an application layering company. User environment management around AppSense, Liquidary Labs, and also a product from FSLogix around the persona of a user moving from one operating system to another, for example. Virtual server stress testing with Login VSI, and then application and interoperability issues. Of course, you use AppDNA to sniff out a lot of the interoperability issues that your applications may have, but also Java issues. You know, who doesn't have Java issues? There's a great little product from FSLogix. They were Best of Synergy in 2015. This is one of the products that they have in their suite that remediates Java issues, whether it's an application or from website, and I think it's like really cool, easy, simple, inexpensive technology to put out into your environment. So let's get into a little bit of why AppDNA while we're having this webinar here. Why would you want to use AppDNA? I came across AppDNA back in 2009. I was working for IBM as a global solution architect, and a large gas and oil company out of Texas wanted to migrate from Windows XP to Windows 7, and within IBM, IBM was using AppDNA in Europe for another customer to migrate, was having great success with it. So I decided to implement that into the project I was working with this company. It ended up that IBM won that deal. We stood up AppDNA in the fall of '09, and it worked as advertised. And I'm a former application packager from a rather large tire company, Michelin, here in Greenville, South Carolina, where they're headquartered. And I just thought it was the best technology I'd ever come across as far as compatibility testing. So in 2010, I left and joined AppDNA. It was a small startup. And in 2011, Citrix acquired AppDNA and worked there until last October when I came back over, or when I came over to Zentegra. AppDNA is by far the best product out on the market to do application compatibility, and it just continues to get better and better every release. And so I'm going to show you, some of the capabilities that it's had for years, but I'm also going to show you some of the newer stuff that it's incorporated as well that you can take advantage of and put this value into your infrastructure. So as far as application compatibility goes, I talk to people all the time that still have 2003 server in their environment. They still have Windows XP. They still have Windows NT in their environment. And if you're one of those people, then that's fine. It's much more common than you would think it would be. And the reason always comes back why those operating systems are in the environment is because of application compatibility. Going from a 32-bit operating system to a 64-bit operating system is not an easy task. And whenever you're going to do a migration, what's the starting point, right? Is it the applications? Is it the environment? So many things play into a migration on the operating system side, but also even in the Citrix world as well as where do you start? And one place that you need to start that seems to take the most amount of time is the application realm. And so the challenges with applications, especially in the last decade, is the application format. Are we going to leave it as physical, or can we place this in a virtual environment? Can we host that application in a Citrix environment, or can we stream it with something maybe with AppV? Then the OS compatibility, that's a major player, right? Like I mentioned, going from 32-bit to 64-bit is a challenge. And like I mentioned, the virtualization, we have XenApp, we have AppV to pick from as well. And then the application profile, the data that it accesses, the performance of that application in a virtual environment. What is going to be the hit on the infrastructure if we put this application into the environment? How many users can we get per server? And then the dependencies of that application. Is it Java dependent? Is it .NET dependent? On and on and on, and so many questions there that we have to answer when we're moving from one old environment to a newer environment. And not only that, but it's just the sheer volume of applications out there. When I was at IBM, one of the benchmarks that we used for applications in an environment was how many per desktop, right? And what we typically did is we looked at something like 10% or less. So if you have 10,000 users, then if you have 1,000 or less applications, then you're doing a pretty good job. If you can get to that 6 to 7% threshold, then you're doing a really, really good job. But a lot of times, depending on what industry you're in, what vertical you're in, what the environment that you're in, or how many environments, several environments in the same infrastructure, that number can grow pretty quickly. We could have 2 or 3 different versions of the same application within our infrastructure at the same time. So let's play a little hypothetical here. Let's say, for example, that you guys on the phone, you're moving from Windows 7 32-bit to Windows 10 64-bit. We've all got to make that jump here relatively soon, and when I say soon, in the next year or 2, 3, you know, with just getting applications, like for example from 03, if you can get them off of 03 onto 08, you can have support up until about 2020. And so, you know, that sounds like, well, great, you know, I can grab 4 more years, but, you know, and we all know that that 4 years goes just so quick in the environment. But, you know, having applications on unsupported operating systems costs companies a lot of money if they want support for those environments. And so getting them off of that is a huge relief to all involved. But let's just say that for our hypothetical here, that moving from Windows 7 32-bit to Windows 10 64-bit, let's just say that 80% of your applications are compatible with Windows 10 64-bit. So if you have 500 applications in your environment, that means that 400 applications are compatible. That's a great starting point. That's a comforting thing to know. But that also means that 100 applications will give you issues. So which 100 of those applications are going to give you issues? So that's something that, how do you find that out? Well, you do your testing, right? First, you have to gather the source. You have to gather the application owners. You have to build the environment, the Windows 10 gold image. You have to have the users come in and test that application on that environment or in that new gold image. And then what if the image changes? You know, back when I was at Michelin, they would change the gold image on me and I'd have to restart my testing. So it's just an iterative thing that you get into. So which 100 of your applications are going to give you trouble? So a value from AppDNA before the project even starts is that AppDNA can tell you which 100 applications are going to give you trouble. That's before you call anyone into test. So with AppDNA, you stand the server up in your environment, you run your 500 applications into AppDNA, and you find out which 100 applications are going to come out red, the ones that are going to that need a little tender loving care or an upgrade or a rewrite to get it into Windows 10. And you do that without human intervention, without calling in these application owners, without spending their time testing the applications for you. So you send those 400 applications that tested out good, which in AppDNA are green and amber. You send them over to user acceptance testing. You focus only on those 100 applications that are red. With AppDNA, there's no need to spend the same amount of time on each application as you would if you didn't have it. If you had those 500 applications, you would spend, you know, hours testing each of them. You don't have to do that with AppDNA. Like I said, there's no need to call in that application owner for red applications. You find out what's wrong with that application down to the file level, to the registry level with that application, and then you start working on a resolution for it. It may be something simple you can do to the environment. It may be something that has to be done to the application. But then what you do is you address those issues, you resolve those issues, and then you call the application owner in to test their application. Much more efficient process around using AppDNA that way, and the testers leave at a much higher percentage happy because their application is going to work in that new environment. So another hypothetical here, I've got hundreds of stories from many customers around AppDNA, but this is one of my favorites. I was in Southern Virginia at a healthcare provider. They wanted me to do a POC with 10 of their applications on site. This is back when we were selling AppDNA. and if I haven't stated it, if you're a Citrix Platinum customer, you own AppDNA today. If you are not Platinum, if you are Standard or Enterprise, you can still evaluate AppDNA for up to 30 days to a month. But if you're Platinum, you own AppDNA. So I'm not here to try to sell you at $665 per application, which was the list price of AppDNA back then. If you had, 1,000 applications, the starting list price was $665,000. And of course, discounts and all, you're still talking several $100,000 to get AppDNA in-house. If you're Platinum, you own it. So these guys were thinking about buying AppDNA for a few $100,000, so they wanted to test it with their applications. Smart to do. When they gave me the 10 apps, I didn't know that one of the applications was bait for me, that they had some experience with it. So this application, they tried to publish it on Server 2012 R2. They did some initial high-level testing, and they showed that everything worked. They called in the application owner. He spent a couple hours testing the application, and what he found out is that the printing wouldn't work. So the application wouldn't print. It would not spit out an error. It would just sit there and spin and spin and spin. So two guys that were trying to get the application into this environment, they both spent 80 hours. That's 2 weeks, not consecutive, but over time, they both spent 80 hours trying to get this application to fully work within this new environment. And if we're paying those guys $80,000 a year, roughly that's about $40 an hour. They spent 160 hours doing that. That's $6,400 that this healthcare provider, that their employer lost to this testing that couldn't get it resolved. So what happened is, when we were in the meeting, they pointed at this app and they said, "Mark, what's wrong with this application?" And they called out the name. And so I said, "Well, how does it look in 2012 R2?" And I said, "Well, it looks like it's red. Let me click it." And so I clicked it, and we went into the report. I scrolled down, and sure enough, there was a 32-bit print driver listed there. And so they start laughing. And so I asked them for the story, and they told me the story that I just told you. Now, this is just an example from just one issue with one application. Now, if you've got 500 apps in your environment and you're fighting things like this, calculate that out as to how many hours, hundreds, thousands of hours that are lost trying to chase down issues that you don't know why that it's happening. I ask people all the time, why do you still have 2003? Well, that's an application issue. Well, you tried it on 08 R2, it didn't work. Correct. Well, why wouldn't it work? A lot of times I hear, I don't know, we just couldn't get it to work. So another value of AppDNA is pinpointing it down. Maybe this application is something that you can't spend time on, right? Or it's not, you need a new version. Maybe it is a 32-bit print driver. You've got to go back to the vendor, get a 64-bit driver for it, or if it's homegrown, you need to tell the developers that they need to develop a new 64-bit driver for this application for you, and not struggle with trying to find it. And of course, your migration projects, like I said, lose thousands of dollars when this issue is iterative, whenever you're in this iterative testing cycle, on and on and on. So a visual for the old way, or the pre-AppDNA way, manual effort of testing applications, is you gather the source, you assign owners of these applications, you set up times for them to test. Either they come in or they remote in and they start testing their application in this new environment. And if they're doing their job, they should try to break that application. And what I mean by that is that they should try to test every function of the application and make sure everything works. Now, that doesn't happen all the time, right? Back when I was at Michelin, I'd have people sign off that their application worked in XP, and we go into pilot mode, and guess what? Something doesn't work. And so now we have to start the process all over again, test out why this new issue cropped up. So if they're doing their job, they need to try to break the application. If they can't break it, then it passes and it goes into UAT. If they do break it, you've got to figure out what the problem is, whether it's the environment or the app. You've got to fix that, resolve it, and then you've got to call them back in and they've got to test again. And if they find something else wrong, the process starts again. You've got to resolve it and then call them back in to test. A lot of time, cost, and risk associated with this manual effort of testing applications, and we've all experienced this, I'm sure. So let's talk about the AppDNA way. So with the AppDNA way, there's automation built in, right? With AppDNA, it's a three-tier infrastructure. We've got an AppDNA server. We've got IIS acting as a broker between the AppDNA server and a SQL database. And what we do is we take your MSIs, your EXEs. If you have AppV, we can even import in your AppV packages. And if the application doesn't have an installer, that's fine. We can still grab the files and folders for that application and import those into AppDNA as well. When that importation happens, we take the metadata, collect that, we move it into the SQL database, we run algorithms to test for bad behavior for that particular environment. And if we find bad behavior, we flag it on a report as red. If it's something that AppDNA is not sure if it's going to be an issue or not, it flags it as amber. If it's not going to be an issue and the application passes, then the application will come out green, good to go, over to UAT and then into pilot. Much less time, cost, and risk associated with it. I'll show you in a little bit, but how easy MSIs are, but I've done MSIs, I've done 100 in an afternoon on site. You just queue them up and import them in. It's not that it's not technical at all to do it. So imagine being able to pull in, you know, your MSI applications in an afternoon, and then in the morning find out if they're going to be good on Windows 10 or not, and it's possible with AppDNA. So with AppDNA, we treat your applications as if they are black box. We look inside that application, we pull out the information that we need, and then we test it. But when we're testing it with these algorithms that I mentioned, we're not testing for one technology at a time, like Windows 10. We're testing for Windows 10, 2012 R2, a hosted terminal service type environment, AppV, on and on. And we're doing that at the same time. So imagine if you have going to Windows 10, but you want to see if it's going to work with the AppV as well. You'd have to first build Windows 10, test the app on Windows 10, and then create the sequence for AppV, and then have the owner come back in and test that a second time. How much more time that adds to the testing to get into this new environment. With AppDNA, you're doing it at the same time. And when, like I said, these algorithms flag the red, amber, green, and give you that knowledge that you can go out and execute on what AppDNA has picked up for that application. I've mentioned the applications quite a bit, but what I also need to mention is the operating system. AppDNA ships with vanilla images for Windows 10 all the way down to Windows XP. And then on the server side, 2012 R2 all the way down to 2003. And soon, once 2016, Server 2016 is released, the engineers over at Citrix will add in an image for 2016 as well. And these vanilla images allow you to start testing for those new environments today. I could come in, implement AppDNA in the morning, and then in the afternoon we're running MSIs in to test against Windows 10. And you do not have to have a Windows 10 gold image in order to do that. We could also be testing for a Citrix 7.6 environment, for example, and you don't have to have a Citrix 7.6 environment stood up in order to test the applications for that environment. That's the reason the vanilla snapshots are there. However, you do create gold images. You create multiple gold images of servers, of desktops, and AppDNA has a way to snapshot those images, pull them into AppDNA so that we can test your applications against your GPO'd or your patched operating system to heighten the accountability, or heighten the what am I trying to say here? Heighten the ability for AppDNA to pick out an issue for your particular applications in that particular environment. So with AppDNA, it's your portal to operating system upgrades or virtualization projects, OS migrations, XenApp upgrades, or XenDesktop initiatives. It's also your application portfolio platform. And what I mean by that is that a lot of times I go in and I ask people, you know, do you have the source for these applications? And a lot of times they tell me, so well, we have to round it up, right? Even this large gas company I mentioned earlier back in 2009, it took them 10 months to round up 600 applications that were just scattered around the world in different locations. So, you know, it took them a lot of time to round up just those applications that they did not know exactly where the source is. So with AppDNA, it's your one-stop shop. I'll show you on the next slide what I mean, but you can come in, you can see the compatibility of the applications, but you can also add in data for each of these applications as well, and I'll show you that in a little bit. It'll help you get out of when you're stuck on this iterative manual testing process that I've shown or talked about earlier. Why the application is failing. Like I mentioned earlier, you know, I ask people, well, why did it fail? I don't know, it just wouldn't work. And then get you out of that costly project and budget overruns. You know, like I mentioned, we still have people with XP in the environment, O3 in the environment, NT in the environment, and it's much more common than what you would think it is. So this is your one-stop shop. I'll show you this in the product in just a little bit. This is your application overview report. You can see over here the application names, manufacturer and version, and then all of the technologies listed across the top. And you can come into this one report and you can see the red, amber, green of each of the applications. So I want to mention quickly something about Compliance Manager. That's something that's new within AppDNA 7.9. So with the Security and Compliance Manager module, what it does is it helps you understand if your applications that you're planning to deploy in your infrastructure could introduce security risks. This module contains an initial set of algorithms and reports which will be extended in the future. So they're limited on the algorithms that are within AppDNA 7.9 right now, but they are expanding them out to make this a much more comprehensive module within AppDNA. These new algorithms assess security and compliance issues caused by outdated runtime and compiler versions, such as ones included with Visual Studio versions older than 2005. Algorithms included also assess applications which reference components that have been deprecated due to security vulnerabilities, and for example, they're like debugging functions. As far as AppDisks go, AppDisks provides you the ability to manage your applications independently of your base images. So, for example, what really application or app disk or application layering, what its purpose is to get applications out of the image and then assign, due to user entitlement, like through AD, these applications to users. So you don't have these applications or multiple versions of the same application within multiple builds. Get them out of the builds, make them independent. And what happens is when you're building an app disk is that you're installing the application. It looks like it's installing on the operating system, but what actually is happening, it's being diverted over to a VHD out on a network server. And so this VHD, what its job is to house that application in like a read-only mode, and so that when the user logs on to their session, non-persistent session or persistent session, this VHD is attached to their session, and it looks like the application is actually installed on the operating system itself. But it's not. But if they go into Windows Explorer, they'll see the folders and files, and if they go into the registry, they'll see the registry entries as well. They can modify and change all they want. Then when they reboot, come back up, the application is the same as what it was in the past, the last time that they logged in. It's not, you don't have to put one application in per VHD or per app disk. You can put multiple applications. So if you have an application that's dependent on a certain version of Java, for example, you could install Java in that VHD and then install that application in that VHD along with it. So AppDisk, along with AppDNA, some of the benefits there, it can provide you some additional capability if you're Platinum. Well, first let me start off. If you are Standard, Enterprise, or Platinum, you own the AppDisk. However, only the Platinum customers are going to get this additional benefit with AppDNA, which allows them or guides them through applying and using AppDisks to ensure the highest success when using the applications. So what happens when you tie AppDNA into an AppDisk? It can tell you if there's a conflict in the AppDisk because, like I said, when the user logs on, it attaches that VHD to that session. It attaches them in an order, a specific order. Let's say we have 1, 2, and 3, okay? And we have them stacked in there. You can use AppDNA to check out these app disks if they are going to attach as 1, 2, and 3, and AppDNA can tell you, wait a minute, we're going to have a DLL conflict between applications 2 and 3 if we install them this way or if we attach them this way. What you can do is actually flip that, and we can go 1, 3, 2, and if we flip applications 2 and 3, then that DLL conflict is gone away. So AppDNA can really help you troubleshoot app disk issues as well. A couple of things I need to mention here. Application layering overall is not AppV. It's not just AppDisk, but it's Unidesk, it's Liquidware, anyone else that does application layering. It's not AppV. They're merged with the OS at boot time. Attaching of the disks is under the hypervisor's control, and there is no isolation like you get with AppV. So if the application is not compatible with the operating system, you're going to get the same issue if you're trying to use application layering to try to fix that issue. As far as the application and the OS is concerned, the application is natively installed. Like I mentioned, the user can see the files and folders, the registry entries. If you go into Control Panel, Programs and Features, you'll see it as an installed application within there as well. So now I'm going to move in to the demo. I've got some questions that are coming in, so I'm going to try to do the demo first, and then we'll get to some Q&A. So let me just make sure that you guys can see my AppDNA server. You can? Great. Now I know the text, I'm sorry, the text is a little bit small within here. I've made it as big as I can. I am going to record this webinar, or I am recording it, and I'm going to post it out on the YouTube channel, and I will email all you guys back whenever I do that, and let you know where it's at. Of course, I'll reach out to you as well if you want to see any of the reports, or you want to go into more in depth, that we can do that as well. So what we're looking at here is AppDNA 7.9. This is the latest release of AppDNA, and what we're looking at here is an overview summary. Now I've only got 8 applications in this particular database, so that's what we're looking at here. You see the application name, manufacturer, version, and then you see the technologies across the top. We have that new Security Compliance Manager in the first column. We've got Windows 10, Server 2012, XenApp hosted terminal service type environment, AppDisks, and AppV. Something I haven't mentioned that I want to address now, web applications. AppDNA, as well as your desktop and your server applications, can test web applications for compliance. So if you have, right now, web applications that are compliant with or compatible with IE 8, but not IE 11, but you'd like to move them up to IE 11, then we can test your web applications to see why they won't work with IE 11, and then get you some data on how you can address those applications. Maybe you want to go to Microsoft Edge. It does the same thing. We can test for compatibility with Edge. You'll also notice a Firefox column in there, so we can test for Firefox compatibility. So if you want to move away from IE, we can do that. And then finally, Works Web. If you're a Zen Mobile customer, then you're aware of this. This is the secure browser that Citrix has in their Zen Mobile suite of applications. So we can test to see if a web application can be compliant and run within Works Web, either on an Apple or an Android type device as well. So let's say now I come in here, I've got my application estate in here, and now Windows 10 is in focus. Let's say that we are going to migrate in the next 6, 12 months, 18 months over to Windows 10. So we need to see what the compatibility here of our application estate is. Now I've got compatibility here for everything, but if I want to navigate through AppDNA, I can just come over here to the left-hand side. I can come down under Desktop Compatibility Manager and just click Windows 10. And I can get several different views of the same information here, but I want to look at the application actions report. I want to peel the onion back a layer, let's say. I want to see where my applications, where they currently stand against Windows 10. So right now we see a couple of pie charts. The first one is where my estate stands right now. And this on the other side, on the right-hand side, is a pie chart that shows me where I can get to. Now earlier I mentioned an 80-20 split. If these numbers, if I had 100 apps, 200 apps, 300 or more in here, these numbers would normalize more around to that type. I just have 8 in here, so that's why we're at a 50-50 split. But I wanted to, I've got some problem applications in here because I wanted to show you some problems that the AppDNA picks up. So since I've scrolled down a little bit, I can see that we list our green applications here and then our red applications here. These green and amber, I want to push over to UAT. I want to go ahead and take these 4 applications and I want to get them into user acceptance testing. It may be an IT person that's going to do it. It may be me that's going to do it. Or it may be an application owner out in the business that's going to do it, but I'm going to go ahead and schedule that. That's part of the value I was talking about with AppDNA. If I had my 80-20 split, then those 80% of applications would go into user acceptance testing. I would focus on just the red ones here on the bottom. Let's say, for example, I'm in charge of Avast antivirus. Let's say that's my application, and now I want to know exactly what's wrong with this application so that I can remediate it if possible and get it into Windows 10. So I'm just going to click the hyperlink for Avast antivirus, and what AppDNA is going to do is going to spin up the action report for me. I see up here I've got the application name, manufacturer, and version across the top. If you've ever wanted to know how many files and registry entries that an application puts into the operating system, AppDNA keeps up with it. That's the way AppDNA tells an application's complexity. We count the number of files and registry entries that an application puts down on the box. You can tweak those. As you can see here, this is 2 dots. AppDNA assigns 1 dot to a low complexity, 2 dots to a medium complexity, and 3 dots to a high complexity application. And you can tweak those for your environment, so you can make your application estate more or less complex. If I scroll down or look at the next table here, these are the results summary tables. I want to pay particular attention to the one that is red here. That's a hard effort here. And it tells me this application needs to be redeveloped to solve the issue. This tells me I've got some major problems with this application. So this is one of the first things I want to look at. So I just click the hyperlink, and it's going to take me down into the report. And now I'm going to be able to see exactly what AppDNA found. Each of the issues that AppDNA picks up, they're all broken out in a group. Their group also have a manifestation. A manifestation is a definition of what the issue is. The manifestation of this one says that 32-bit sys kernel mode drivers are not supported on 64-bit Microsoft Windows platforms. I've got a problem. AppDNA has found 32-bit signatures in these files, and more than likely I'm going to have either go back to the vendor and get a 64-bit version of this application. Or if it's homegrown, I'm going to have to get this information over to the developers so they can start writing a compliant DLL or drivers for my application so I can move it into Windows 10. This is going to be an issue. As with the manifestation for each of the issues, there's also a remediation part. For this one, it says a new 64-bit signed driver needs to be written or supplied by the ISV, or if it's homegrown, by our developers. If I'm still not quite sure as to what this means, if it's giving me an error, then I'm not quite sure as to what it means. If you look, there's a URL, and these go out to MSDN, Microsoft support sites, other sites to give you more information. And if I click that, I'm going to go right up here. A web window opens, or IE opens for me, and what's going to happen is this is going to open up on the MSDN2 site, and now I've got even more information about why this is a problem for this application in this environment. So not only is AppDNA pointing out down to the file or registry level why my application is broken, but it's also giving me or the developers more information. It's educating me on why this is a problem. So it's not just finding the issue for AppDNA and then just telling you it's not going to work. It's doing everything it can to make sure that you know what to do in order to fix it. So right now with this application, this one's in pretty bad shape. I'm going to have to, not call in the owner of the application to test this one. I've got to resolve this before I move it on to UAT. As with most reports within AppDNA, they're in the same format. So for example, if I go over to server 2012 R2, if I was trying to get this application in server 2012 R2, I can pull up the application actions for it. Between Windows 10 and 2012 R2, since they're both built off the same framework, if you will, and they are both 64-bit operating systems, a lot of the issues are going to be the same. But if I scroll down and take a look, I can go to my Avast Antivirus report for 2012 R2. This is a different technology, of course, a similar but different, but the reporting still looks the same. So if I were to go into AppV, go into the application actions report for AppV, I would see the pie chart's a little bit different. Some of the applications are going to have different amber or green statuses, or red. It just so happens that antivirus is red again for AppV. This thing's causing me trouble all over the place, right? And you can see here that I've got a couple of more red issues. But what I was trying to show you here is that the reporting moving from one technology to another is the same. All right, the next thing I wanted to cover is importation of applications. How do we get the applications into AppDNA? So 90% of the time you're in AppDNA, once it's stood up, you're going to be in either import or reports applications. So I'm going to click import here, and I'm going to go up and I'm going to click applications. So now I'm on the import applications page, and I've got a couple of tabs here. I've got direct import, install capture, and self-provisioning. I'm just going to cover direct import and install capture. Self-provisioning is something that I rarely use. It's something that I use if we have I used to use it when I would get IBM or HP or Dell set up to work with AppDNA for their large packaging environments. If you've got a very large company, and you have like a packaging manager or two, and then you have 10 or 20 packagers, then it may be something you want to look into. But typically I just use direct import and install capture. Direct import, this is for MSIs. I mentioned earlier on in the webinar that importing MSIs was easy. I'm going to show you how easy it is. So let me go out and find my applications. I've got some applications here. I'm just going to select 2 or 3. and then I'll queue them up. You'll see that they're queued up. All I've got to do to import them in now is click Add to Import Queue. With MSIs, they're built on a technology that if you've ever looked inside an MSI file, it's just a bunch of data tables. AppDNA can reach inside, grab that data out of those tables, and import that metadata into the SQL database. We don't have to install an MSI. We can do it without installing the MSI at all. Once that importation is done, I'll follow my progress here. It'll tell me that it's finished importing. I'll just click the Analyze button, and then I'll analyze these applications against whichever technology I want to analyze against, Windows 10, Server 2012, AppV, and on. And when that's done, it'll kick me out to the report page, and then I can see exactly what my status is against Windows 10, for example. That's it. That's all there is to it. For an EXE, there's a little bit more. An EXE is built differently than an MSI, so I can't just look inside the EXE. I've got to actually install the application. So in order to do that, if the application is today running fine on Windows 7, then I would get a Windows 7 VM from you, and I would tie that to AppDNA. I'd install an agent on that Windows 7 machine that would allow the server and that VM to talk, to communicate. And then what would happen is that when I browse out and I find my EXE, when I click Add to Import Queue, what's going to happen is that Windows 7 VM will spin up. I'm going to take a before snapshot of the OS and registry programmatically within it. I'm going to install that EXE. I can tweak it if I need to, meaning I can select or deselect what it's installing as it's going through the installation. And then finally at the end, when I finish with that, we're going to take an after snapshot of the OS and the registry. And when those are combined, we're going to take that bundle and import it into SQL. And then when that's finished, we'll click Analyze, and it's just the same as MSIs at that point. We just analyze it against the different technologies. When that finishes, we'll see the red, amber, green reporting on the back side. You can set that up to be totally automated if you want. There is a way, you see here, auto click. It even clicks the next finish for you, and it can be all automated if you wish. Some applications don't like the automation, if you will. They don't like being called programmatically by another EXE. So you can get around that by just doing it manually and going through it. Doesn't take that much more time at all. And that way, if the application needs tweaking, you can tweak it as the installation is moving along. So that's how you get your applications into AppDNA. If your application doesn't have an installer, if it's out on a network share somewhere and the user just has an icon, then we can use this same method with the VM. We can just spin up that VM. We can take the before snapshot, copy the files and folders over, take the after snapshot, and then analyze that. So it's simple to get those types of applications in as well. Web applications. If I want to do it from here, I could just give it a name. We'll call it cnn.com, for example. I can give it the URL. And if it's externally hosted, and that's all I have, then I'll just click OK and queue that up. If I were to click import, what would happen is a browser window would open, and I could traverse cnn.com, and AppDNA would capture the HTML rendering that comes through that web browser, and then at the end, when I'm done, I can bundle that and import that into AppDNA to test. I can set that to be automated as well. We use a spider to start at the top level of the website, and then it traverses all the way down. If data needs to be included, it'll stop, flag the data boxes, text boxes for you to as yellow, so you can input in the data and then continue on through that, or you can turn the automation off and traverse that website manually. Now, this is rather hard for people to do that are desktop people or Citrix people, because a lot of times they can't log in to a particular website or a web application. So let me show you what we have here. There's a tool that you can actually give to a user. It's the Web Application Capture tool. You can send this MSI over to them, install it on their machine, and have them traverse the website and then send the output back over to you so you can import that into AppDNA. It's something that we cut away from AppDNA to allow that to happen because, like I said, a lot of times for web applications in particular, you don't have a logon, so there's no way you can test that. We can send it to someone that does. Operating systems, I wanted to show you, these are the vanilla operating systems that come with AppDNA. We can also use Snapshot Manager. You can build your own gold image, and we can place this exe, this executable, on the desktop of your gold image or multiple gold images if you have those. Use it to snapshot your build and then import it into AppDNA so that we're testing your applications against your build. We want to heighten the accuracy of what we're testing, so we can do it that way. And then finally, something, probably the most major thing that's happened to AppDNA really in the last 5-6 years. We were begging for this back in 2010, 2011. 90% of the people I've ever spoken to about AppDNA have wanted this capability. It's the capability to take your, I call it Super Tuesday, that second Tuesday of every month where Microsoft pushes down their patches to us. Now with AppDNA 7.8 and 7.9, you can take those patches, you can import them into AppDNA, and you can tell whether a patch is going to affect your application or not. It will get down to the file level. So if it's replacing, let's say, wininet.dll or something like that, you can tell the application. It'll list the application that's being affected, and it will list also the file or files that are being affected. This is huge because now, before you ever deploy your patches, you can test your entire portfolio. At best, what I've seen is that you take your top 2, 5, 10% of your most critical business apps, put them on a machine with the patches on there from that month, and you have the users test them before you deploy the patches. The server-side guys are going to love this. The desk-side guys or desktop guys are going to love this because now they can test their application estates before they ever push the patches out into development, before they ever deploy them. And so this is huge for AppDNA, and as far as I know, this is the only product that exists to allow you to test your entire portfolio of applications prior to pushing out any patches. One of the last things I wanted to show you here are some of the things in the settings. It has some other capabilities. It has many, many more capabilities. Let me just state that. An hour just doesn't give me enough time, but there are many more capabilities as well. I wanted to show you something that's called the effort calculator. You can import in your applications today. Windows 10, we have to start planning, let's say, in 6 months for Windows 10 to deploy for the next 12 months, right? 18 months. You can go in here and create a report, and it's very specific to your environment. There are some industry standard numbers included, but there are also some numbers that are included for just your environment as well. How many working days in a day or hours in a day? How many working days average in a month? How long does it take to stage a test computer? What's the size of our remediation team? What's the size of our testing team? How much do we pay these people? Right? These are particular to your environment. And then, how long does it take to fix an easy remediation in a simple application, all the way down to how long does it take to fix something hard in a complex application, right? And then the testing time, the smoke testing time for each of these applications. This is the information that's associated with you. You fill out this information. You also fill out some other information that's here in the effort calculator report. I'm going to say that I want to do Windows 10. Here's the other information that I can fill out. And let's say this 8 applications is just a sample of my 250 application estate. You can see that it starts building what it's going to take me without AppDNA and what it would take me with AppDNA. But I don't have Office on this machine, but I could actually click Next up here if I had Office, and it would give me a very nice executive summary with graphs and everything, stating out exactly how long it would take me without AppDNA to do this project, how long it would take me with AppDNA to do this project, the timeline, how long it would take, and the cost associated with it as well. Very handy to have to help you plan out how long it's going to take you to migrate your environment to Windows 10, for example, or on the server side to 2016. It's very handy to have this type of data when you're doing that type of planning. A couple of other things I want to mention here. I've got about a minute left. If you have Lakeside in your environment, we can also tie into the Lakeside SQL database and bring out application usage data. Very handy with licensing. How long is it going to, how many, what applications are being used by which people, how often do they use those applications, and so forth. We can tie into Active Directory as well and pull in your users. Config Manager, System Center Config Manager, we can tie into SCCM from Microsoft. It gives us information on SCCM collections, what type of devices are these applications on, who's using them, and so on. So a lot of information that we can get there. One thing I want to show you with the applications are the forms. I mentioned earlier that I could put in different information. Let's say, for example, I want to go in here. I added this yesterday, as a matter of fact. This tab is new. I created it yesterday. I created license information. I can tell it. I can put in here when my renewal date is, what my license cost is for these applications. This is some of the data that I mentioned earlier that I could put in here to make AppDNA a one-stop shop. It shows me where my source is for the application. I've added one in here for cost center. I could even have my cost center added in here as a tag. You can do whatever you want with these as far as application forms, attributes, and so on. You can add in whatever you want to make AppDNA that one-stop shop for you. We've come up to the end of the hour. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you so very much for your time today. If you have any questions, please reach out to me at mark.henderson@zentegra.com, and I'll be more than happy to answer your questions. And again, thank you for your time, and have a great day.